The Shadow People's Pact. 4 years Olivia James had lived a life filled with routine, work, family, and quiet nights at home. Nothing out of the ordinary ever occurred. But everything changed when she nearly died. It started on an ordinary evening when Olivia, driving back from a late shift at the hospital, lost control of her car on the slick highway. She spun off the road and plunged into a ravine. The impact knocked her unconscious, and when she awoke she was in a place that felt not quite real. A dim, shadowy world stretched out before her, black voids that seemed to hum with an unsettling energy. She was no longer alone. Tall, featureless figures moved around her, their forms flickering in and out of existence. Their eyes, if they had them, were dark and unfathomable. One stepped forward. Its voice was neither male nor female, a strange whisper that echoed in her mind. "You were chosen." Olivia's heart raced. "Chosen for what?" "We offer you a deal. Return to life, but there will be a price. One day you will pay. In a way you will never expect." Before she could speak, she felt herself being pulled back, her body forced to return to the world of the living. The figures faded as the sensation of weightlessness left her. She awoke in a hospital bed, her body bruised but alive. The next few years passed in a blur. Olivia tried to forget the dark figures. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to move on, the memory clung to her, whispering in the quiet moments, reminding her of the promise she had made. Then the messages began. It was a late autumn evening when the first letter arrived. She found it tucked beneath her door, its envelope black, the handwriting impossibly neat, as though written by someone who had all the time in the world. Inside was a single sentence. "The price is ready to be paid." Olivia thought it was some sick joke, but as days turned to weeks, more letters came, each more cryptic than the last. Messages hidden in the pages of books at the library, whispered through her phone's voicemail, and even scrawled across mirrors when she awoke from sleep. Always the same eerie phrase, "The price is ready to be paid." Soon she started seeing them again. At first, it was just shadows out of the corner of her eye, figures too tall and thin to be human. Then one night as she walked down a quiet alley, one of them stepped into the light. It was the same figure from her near-death experience, its form flickering, its presence overwhelming. "You've been evading us," it said in that same hollow whisper. "Time to fulfill your bargain." Fear gripped Olivia's heart. "What do you want from me?" The figure's form seemed to shimmer. "All in good time. But the price, it must be paid." "You agreed." Olivia stumbled backward, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "How can I make it stop? Please just tell me what you want." The figure tilted its head as though amused. "You will know soon enough. The debt cannot be avoided." From that night on, Olivia's life began to unravel. Her body grew weaker. Strange illnesses overtook her, ones doctors couldn't explain. Her skin seemed to age overnight, and the weight of something unseen pressed heavily on her chest. The messages never stopped. Sometimes they came as whispers in the night, other times they appeared on her phone or in emails, always cryptic, always demanding. And each time, she grew closer to understanding the true cost of the bargain she had made. One night, the shadow people appeared again. This time there was no ambiguity. They were there to collect. "You thought it was over," the figure whispered, "but there is always a price." Olivia collapsed to her knees. "What do you want from me?" The figure reached out, its shadowy hand touching her forehead. "You were meant to die. You were meant to stay with us. But now your soul is ours." As the darkness closed in, Olivia realized the true nature of the pact she had made, the one she couldn't remember fully, the one she had been warned about but had never truly understood. The shadow people were not offering life but a debt. A debt that could never be paid in full no matter how many years she lived. A pact that would forever haunt her, drawing her closer to the inevitable end. The last thing she saw was the flickering forms of the figures surrounding her, their hollow voices echoing in her mind. And then, darkness. Olivia awoke again, but not in the same way as before. This time there was no hospital bed, no harsh lights, and no sterile scent of antiseptic. She was in a place that felt ancient, timeless. A vast, endless void of black and gray, stretching infinitely in every direction. There was no ground beneath her feet, no sky above, just a never-ending expanse of shadows. The shadow figures were there, standing in a circle around her. Their presence was suffocating, the air thick with an energy that made her skin crawl. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious, but everything felt different. As though time had ceased to exist here. One of the figures stepped forward, its form more solid now, no longer flickering. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, stared into hers with an unsettling, penetrating gaze. You have one choice left, the figure said, stepping closer. You can accept your role as one of us, serving the shadow realm for eternity. Or you can try to break the pact. But in doing so you will risk everything. We will take your soul anyway, but you will not live long enough to see the end. Olivia felt the despair closing in, but then, a flicker of hope. Could she break the pact? Could she find a way to fight back? But she knew it wouldn't be easy. She had seen the consequences of defying the shadow people. The warning had been clear in the whispers, in the cryptic messages that had tortured her for so long. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, and whispered a quiet, defiant plea, "There has to be another way." The figure smiled, an eerie, unfeeling twist of its form. "Perhaps. But it is not a path you can take alone. The answer lies not in defiance but in understanding. Choose carefully." As the figure faded back into the shadows, Olivia stood alone in the dark void, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her life was no longer hers to control. The shadow people had come to collect their due. And they were not finished with her yet. The pact had only begun. Olivia's mind raced. She stood in the suffocating darkness, surrounded by the shifting forms of the shadow figures. The weight of their gaze pressed down on her chest, every breath becoming more labored, every thought more fragmented. But somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the overwhelming sense of loss, a spark of defiance flickered within her. The figure's words echoed in her mind. The answer lies not in defiance but in understanding. For a moment she closed her eyes, taking in a slow, steadying breath. Understanding. What had they meant? How could she break the pact when every part of her being was bound to it? How could a soul fight against something that controlled its very essence? She remembered the moments before her accident, when she had been so close to death, when the shadow people had first offered her a way back. Their promise had seemed so simple at the time, life for a life, a second chance, but now it was clear, they had never intended for her to truly return. Her life had been nothing more than a fleeting debt they had allowed her to repay in part, a sliver of time bought at a cost she had never understood. But there was something more. In those fleeting glimpses of her life, when the shadows had pulled back the veil of her past, Olivia had seen something. Something that hadn't been there before. She had seen moments when she chose, when she stood at the crossroads of life and death and rejected the path they had laid out for her. It wasn't a pact made by accident. It was a pact of manipulation, a soul entangled with their dark influence but not wholly theirs. They had planted themselves into her mind, but the will to fight them, to choose something else, had always been there. A seed of resistance. "It's mine," she realized suddenly. "My soul isn't theirs to take. It's mine." The realization surged through her. She had always had a choice, even if the shadow people had tried to make her forget it. She had the strength to break free, to sever the ties that bound her to their realm. She felt it, the dark tendrils of their influence like chains wrapped around her, pulling her down, holding her in place. But with that understanding came something more, willpower. The spark that refused to fade, the part of her that had survived the accident and had returned to life despite the odds. She stepped forward, her hands shaking but resolute. No, the word was soft at first, barely a whisper in the vast empty space. But as it passed her lips, it grew louder, gaining strength. "No, I won't serve you. I won't be your puppet." The shadow people shifted, the forms flickering and trembling as if they were not used to resistance. One of the figures stepped forward, its presence overpowering. "You cannot fight us," it said, its voice like 1,000 whispers in unison. "You are bound to us. You made the pact." "I didn't know what I was agreeing to," Olivia said, her voice growing steadier. "You tricked me. You made me think I owed you, that I didn't have a choice. But I do. I choose to fight you. I choose freedom." The figure's shadow writhed, a dark, formless mass as if it were angry, its voice dripping with venom. "You will pay the price. You will suffer for your defiance." "I've already suffered enough," Olivia spat. "And I'm done. I'm done with you." The shadows closed in around her, the darkness pressing against her skin like cold iron. But Olivia didn't back down. She focused on that spark, the strength she'd felt when she first understood her power. The seed of defiance. She wasn't just going to resist, she was going to sever the ties that bound her. As the shadow figures swarmed around her, she extended her hands, palms out, as if she could push them away. And then, from deep within her, she felt a surge of energy, something ancient, something primal. In that moment, Olivia realized what the shadow people had underestimated. They thought they could control her soul, but they had underestimated her will to survive, to reclaim her life. With a cry, she pushed against the shadows, and the force was like an explosion, a burst of light and power that surged from her core. The darkness recoiled, its form wavering and splintering under the intensity of her will. "No," she whispered fiercely, her hands trembling but unwavering. "You won't take me?" The figure that had been closest to her, the one that had spoken to her most often, let out a screech, a horrible, inhuman sound. The shadows rippled, their form cracking as if their very existence was being torn apart by the force of Olivia's defiance. "You cannot escape," the figure hissed. "We own you." "No," Olivia repeated more firmly now. "You never did." With a final push, the shadows shattered, scattering like smoke, their presence breaking apart, dissolving into the ether. The dark realm around Olivia began to unravel, the oppressive weight lifting, the air clearing. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Olivia felt lightness. She had broken the pact. The shadow people's influence was gone, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of their whispers, fading into nothingness. Her soul, once bound to their realm, was now free. But as the last remnants of the shadow figures dissolved, Olivia realized something crucial. Breaking the pact hadn't just freed her from their control, it had cost them something too. A part of their power had been siphoned off, shattered like the chains that had once bound her. They were no longer as invincible as they once seemed. Olivia stood in the clearing void, her heart racing but her mind clear. She had not only fought for her own freedom but had shattered the illusion of their control. She had chosen to reclaim her life, her soul, and in doing so had struck a blow against the shadow people that they would never forget. And though the darkness had been banished from her, Olivia knew one thing for sure: she would never stop fighting. For as long as she had breath in her body, she would never let the shadows claim her again.